If you were going to murder somebody, after you murdered them, would you go on the computer and search how to dismember and dispose of a body?
I mean, I tend to do my research before getting myself into hot water, but I guess to each their own. Hi, I'm Lainey Law,
And I'm attorney Andrew Myers.
and today we're going to be discussing the disappearance of Ana Walshe. So, this story is a bit of a doozy, especially if you're coming into this completely unfamiliar. So, Ana Walshe has been missing since January 1st, and it wasn't until her job reported her missing that her husband told the police when they arrived that she hadn't been around for a few days, which is a little surprising. You would think that if your wife's been gone, that you'd be a little bit more worried about where she might be at.
Well, the last time Ana Walshe was seen, and this has been a big story in the greater Boston area, but I think it's also gone national, and the case is pending in the courts now at this time. But what happened was that Ana Walshe and her husband Brian Walshe had been married. They had 3 children, ages 2, 4, and 6. Ana was an immigrant from Serbia. She came to America. She got a job and met Brian Walshe, whether she met him while she was working in the hospitality industry or whether they met through a mutual friend is one of those little details that's not nailed down. But they married. They had the 3 boys. Ana was a real up and comer. She had a fantastic job, but it was in Washington, D.C. With Tishman Speyer, a huge real estate conglomerate that owns Yankee Stadium, the Chrysler Building, and huge, companies and buildings like that in 41 different countries. So Ana is working in Washington, D.C., and Brian is in greater Boston in the really swank suburb of Cohasset, big money town right on the South Shore. New Year's Eve 2022, they have a friend over. They have the friend over until midnight. New Year's Eve, the friend goes home at 1 o'clock. That's the last time anyone other than Brian has seen her alive. A lot of details to get into, but let's see. What do we do first? No body. People say, well, there's no body, but let's take a look at the internet searches that Mr. Walshe was engaged in at the time that she disappeared. I'll do the first couple. The first one, this is January 1st of 2023. Brian Walshe does an internet search. How long for someone to be missing to inherit? The next search, New Year's Day, the day his wife goes missing. Can you throw away body parts?
So, next search, what does formaldehyde do? Curious. How long does DNA last? And can identification be made on partial remains, which oddly specific, but
Hey, New Year's Day at 11:34 in the morning, dismemberment and the best ways to dispose of a body. Mr. Walshe then does an internet search, how to clean blood from a wooden floor. The next search is luminol to detect blood.
what happens when you put body parts in ammonia? Not something I personally have thought about, but I can see that being a Google search. And is it better to put crime scene clothes away or to wash them?
Second day of the new year, hacksaw, best tool to dismember. Can you be charged with murder without a body? And so those were searches that were done.
With some incriminating searches, but you got to keep in mind they weren't on his phone. They were on his children's iPad, so maybe it was the 4-year-old, 6-year-old, 2-year-old. Clearly, it could be anybody in that house. You don't think the kids are looking up?
Attorney Law, I don't think that's a really good defense. It's a good thing you're not up against this prosecutor. Lynn Boland had gone into court for his arraignment and explained some of his activities. He'd gone shopping and he'd gone around to people's dumpsters. And here is Prosecutor Lynn Boland at the arraignment.
And following those, the defendant was seen on surveillance at the Home Depot in Rockland. In checking the surveillance, the defendant is observed on a security camera pushing a cart. Items included cleaning products, mops, brushes, tape, tarp, a tie-deck suit with boot covers, buckets, goggles, baking soda, a hatchet. He had a face mask and rubber gloves on at the time he was pushing the cart in Home Depot. Surveillance shows the defendant's Volvo, as well as a male fitting the defendant's appearance, exit a car near the dumpster. He walks to the dumpster carrying a garbage bag. He's leaning, and it appears to be heavy as he has to heft it into the dumpster.
So initially when people started saying, well, all right, there's something untoward here and what's going on, Mr. Walshe told law enforcement, well, he went to his mother's house that day up in Swampscott, which Cohasset is south of Boston. Swampscott is north of Boston. And he said he went to his mother's house, and he also went to the CVS store and the Whole Foods store. Well, you know, nowadays there are surveillance cameras everywhere, and I mean everywhere. And so prosecutors looked, or the police looked, and there's no Brian Walshe at the CVS or the Whole Foods. However, there were surveillance cameras at a Home Depot and a Lowe's store where he's buying the things the prosecutor just went over. Mr. Walshe is buying a hacksaw. He's buying an axe. He's buying a full body Tyvek suit, the kind you only see at a hazardous materials waste site. He's buying $450 worth of cleaning supplies. Now, I need a new mop. The last time I mopped, the floor had broke, so I need a new mop. But $450 worth of cleaning supplies, mops, tarps. He bought a package of 400 rags. He bought just all kinds of, he bought a ton of buckets, those large 5-gallon buckets that they sell. So he had a hard time explaining all that. He was not actually taken into custody until January 8th. He had given various stories, and the initial charges were impeding an investigation or misleading police, because he gave all these stories that panned out not to be true. And then they did, in fact, nab him because he was misleading the prosecutors. And then his stories kind of fell apart, wouldn't you say?
You know, I mean, he probably just got mixed up and thought like Home Depot and Lowe's and all that stuff were, you know, what was it called? Whole Foods. He probably just like spent a lot of money and didn't realize. It's just like, oh, I was going to spend, you know, a couple $100 at Whole Foods anyway. My mom clearly needed the cleaning supplies. That's what mops, plural. We all need a mop.
Yeah, of course. And so there's Ana Walshe. She immigrated to the United States from Serbia. She was born in 1983. She had a wonderful job in Washington, D.C. that we've talked about before. Ana met Brian at some point. They married in 2016. And they, to the outside world, they were this happy couple, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody really thought anything untoward was going on. They lived in this beautiful home in Cohasset, beautiful suburb of Boston. And so now police are looking for her remains in a dump in Peabody, Massachusetts. The unfortunate thing was there they are in their Tyvek suits looking through things at the Peabody dump for the remains of beautiful Ana, who was last seen by her husband, Brian. It's just a tragic story. And there he is at the arraignment in the Quincy, Massachusetts District Court. Quincy is a town just south of Boston. And there were a couple of odd, people say that the story is kind of like an onion where you peel back the layers of an onion. I look at it as somebody's bad lawn that has a lot of rabbit holes. And there were a lot of rabbit holes in this case. One of them was that in 2014, Brian Walshe threatened to kill Ana Walshe. At least that's what she reported to the Washington, D.C. police. The police never really followed up on it because she didn't follow up and she didn't cooperate. That's what the police reports say. And even though that incident was in 2014, she marries him in 2016.
Well, when somebody says, "I love you, baby," it was a joke, you gotta trust them. He seems like an innocent man. I mean, up to this point with all that evidence, how could you possibly think he's guilty?
I don't know. I've never threatened to kill somebody that I was married to or in a relationship with, but to each his own, I guess. The biggest rabbit hole in the bad yard is that at the time of these alleged murders, Mr. Walshe was on house arrest from the federal court in Boston on a charge that he had sold illegally or fraudulently some Andy Warhol paintings. He came into possession of some fake Andy Warhol paintings, and they were of the Shadows series, if you know anything about art, which I'll admit I really don't. He advertised them on eBay for, I believe it was $200,000 or something like that. And he ended up selling these two Warhol paintings for $80,000.
Good deal.
Yeah, 80,000. Wow.
Pretty nice.
Well, you think it's a good deal? They turned out to be fakes. How would you feel if you paid $80,000 for a painting and it turned out to be a fake like you could buy at Walmart?
Honestly, at that point, I don't even know what I would do. The other day, I bought a guitar amp and they forgot to give me the power cord for it, and I just wrestled out a power cord out of my own drawer. I'd be the person buying the $80,000 painting and be like, oh, this sucks.
Well, Mr. Walshe took the check for $80,000. He deposited it into his account and he withdrew $33,400. And then, oops, the guy he sold it to was savvy enough to figure out these are fakes. I could have bought these at Walmart, and charges were filed. And Mr. Walshe was found guilty in federal court of wire fraud, interstate transfer scheme to defraud, possession of converted goods in an unlawful monetary transaction. He was found guilty in the federal court. He was wearing an ankle bracelet, and he faced up to 20 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release, and a $250,000 fine. So he was on release with an ankle bracelet. And meanwhile, he's running around to these landfills on the North Shore in Swampscott, the South Shore in Brockton and Ashland, which are south of Boston. He's running around with this ankle bracelet. And that didn't sit very well with the federal court, but he's got bigger problems right now with these charges. Mr. Walshe, Brian Walshe, had been out of touch with his father for years and years and years until the father died. And then Brian stepped in and he contested the will. Why? Well, the father was a well-known neurosurgeon. In fact, he had been the head of the neurology department at Brigham and Women's, which is a huge, very well-known hospital in Boston. The father had been a very well-known neurosurgeon, and Brian apparently had tried to scam the father a few times, and so they were out of touch for 10 years. And in the father's will, the father gave Brian good wishes, and that's it. That's all. So Brian, of course, contested the will, and the will contest did not go well. So all these other little things that are going on in this case, and it's the most bizarre case with all the little side notes going on.
Yeah, I mean, you know how dads can be. Sometimes, you just can't make them happy. Clearly, this guy, he's got a glowing track record. I don't know how anybody could ever accuse him for something like this. It sounds like his dad, probably thought he was too good for him or something.
So there's the scam trying to sell the phony art. There's the contest of the father's will when the father left him nothing. There's the 2014 incident in which at first Ana had said that he threatened her life, and then she pulled that back. Then the other little rabbit hole was that just a couple of days after all of this happened, New Year's of 2023, a former home that they had owned on Jerusalem Road in Cohasset caught on fire. And people, I remember when that happened, people were saying that's kind of a bizarre thing to have happen. And it was a bizarre thing to have happen. But apparently that incident was a coincidence. The fire investigators went in and they found, they never said exactly what the cause was, but the fire started in some faulty piping that led to a natural gas fireplace. So that was unrelated, although what a strange case to have all these little, I say rabbit holes. Other people say,
onion layers.
Onion.
I don't know. The thing with the fire, like, it's interesting to me because obviously, like, this house was inhabited by other people, but it almost makes me curious as if, not to say that Brian isn't a completely innocent saint right now, but it's almost, I don't know when they sold the house, but I wonder if there had been any scheming going on before that.
Well, it's really kind of hard to tell with everything else that was happening. Mm-hmm. Some legal and true crime experts say, oh, well, how can they ever get a conviction? How can they ever get a conviction when there's no body? And my retort to that is that the Massachusetts jury instructions will tell the jurors that they can draw inferences. Here's the actual jury instruction in Massachusetts. It's standard Massachusetts jury instruction 3.100. And it tells the jury that you can use your common sense and your lifetime experiences, and you can draw reasonable inferences. That's totally permissible to draw a deduction that you may make from evidence that you have accepted as believable. So to say that the case is not a strong case because there's no body kind of belies the fact that, there's a bloody hacksaw in the basement. There's a broken knife, I should say, in the basement. There are blood stains in the basement. He had all of these internet searches that we went over before. He's going to Lowe's and to Home Depot and buying $450 worth of cleaning supplies, tarps, hazmat suit, all of this stuff. And then he's dumping it hours, maybe days later in 4 or 5 different dumpsters and dumps. So there have been cases, maybe we'll do an episode on that sometime, but there have been cases where people disappear and there's a conviction. So it's not necessary.
Mm-hmm. And the crazy, there's a lot of elements to this. Like you mentioned, the world tour of dumpsters, and we had kind of touched before, a lot of the trash had been incinerated, but they were able to find her COVID ID, her Prada bag, I believe a necklace. So some of her belongings were found, and those stuff were actually found over by his mother's house, crazy enough. So when we talk about, inferences and like how could they possibly infer this? Well, something that may lead the jury to believe one way or the other is the fact that we found some of her stuff over by his mom's house. Little sketch, but it's just crazy. It's just, like, I think about like a hacksaw. I personally never used a hacksaw, but that sounds a little personal, that you're cooking away, working for a while. And then on top of that, some of the searches, how to make a body smell good, how long until a body starts to smell. Disgusting.
It's crazy. Now, motive is not an element, contrary to popular belief. Prosecutors are not required to prove motive in a murder case. There are certain elements, malice aforethought, and that there was an unlawful killing, etc. But motive is not a element that's required for prosecutors to prove a murder case. However, most prosecutors go by the rule of thumb that it certainly helps the jury to have a motive. So the motives that have been banding about in this case, one, Ana had about $2.7 million worth of life insurance in which Brian was a beneficiary, the sole beneficiary. She had 2 life insurance policies. One was from her employer in Washington, D.C., and the other one was one that she took out herself. Other areas of motive could be that we believe that she was having an affair. There are thoughts and there's discussion that Anna had started having an affair in November of 2022, in 2023, and she had actually had a conversation with somebody in Washington, D.C. in late December, right before she came back to Boston for the last time. And she became rather distraught, saying that she knew that her husband was likely going to jail very soon because of the conviction on the phony art sales. And she discussed with her friend how she would probably move to Washington. She owned a building there. She owned a $1.3 million townhouse, and bring the boys, the three kids, 2, 4, and 6 at that time, to Washington. And she became very distraught. So one can never really know what a motive is. But if Brian knew that she was having an affair, and Brian knew that she had all this insurance money, that's something that one can argue as a motive, even though that is not required. But getting back, Ms. Law, to the fact that there's no body, there's a lot of other circumstantial evidence. If you were on the jury, what would you do with just knowing the little bit that we know here?
I mean, just because someone has a hacksaw and blood all over their basement, how could you possibly infer guilt out of that? Who doesn't make $450 trips for cleaning supplies at Home Depot and Lowe's? It's just a busy, helpful guy. I mean, all joking aside, it is interesting because you see cases like this, and for a lot of people, it may seem cut and dry, and you might be sitting here thinking, well, yeah, this guy did it, and, innocent until proven guilty. We're not saying one way or another. This is just our own inferences and our own opinions. But there's so many different elements to it, especially the fact that none of the body parts are found, and especially there's this, connotation or stipulation that you have to find the body. So even though people can infer it, it is curious to see what the jury is actually going to say as a result of that, because, maybe he threw something else away that had all of her stuff in it, just conveniently. I mean, I don't know who's throwing away a Prada bag, but...
Right. People often ask me in cases of this nature, and you pointed something out that we really need to emphasize again, that everyone, including Mr. Walsh, is entitled to a presumption of innocence, and we do presume everyone innocent. We're just, stating what evidence has been out there in the public. But people often ask me in various cases, including this one, well, if you were the defense attorney, how would you possibly defend this person? Well, the first thing is that the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution affords everyone a right to a fair trial, and everyone is entitled to a defense. And so he's well within his rights to have pleaded not guilty, both in the indictment in March of 2023 and at the arraignment back in January of 2023. So that's his right. If I were the defense attorney, I'd make all those arguments. There's no body. There's really no motive. I mean, so what? He had life insurance. Anybody that has a family with 3 young kids, it's just something that, in the normal course of business you do, especially if you have a high income job like she had. The other defenses are certainly to ensure that law enforcement followed all the rules with regard to getting the proper warrants. I mean, how were they able to just go into the house? Yeah, apparently we're told they had a warrant. How were they able to just go to these dumps? Well, apparently they had a warrant. But if you're a defense attorney, these are the things that you bring up. But I think as much as many people say the prosecutors in this case have their work cut out for them without a body, I think it's true the defense has their work cut out for them too. Don't you think?
Mm-hmm. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, but if he had admitted guilt to his attorney, does that not mean that she's legally obligated, or she doesn't?
Attorney-client privilege, absolutely. Attorney-client privilege is absolutely protected, and that's why attorney-client privilege is there to encourage people to to speak freely to their attorney. Some people say, well, how can you do this type of work if you know the person is guilty? Well, it's a constitutional function under the Sixth Amendment. As I said before, you're entitled to absolute fair trial and an attorney. And so, yeah, the answer to that question is easy. The attorney is only obligated to say anything if someone appears imminent to be a threat to themselves or others, but absolutely. It's one of those things that defense attorneys generally will tell you that they don't want to know. They don't want to know the ultimate question. They'll spend hours and hours and hours with their client, but that's one thing they just don't want to know.
I was recently in a discussion about like morals versus ethics. And when you are an attorney, you know, even if something's not morally correct, your ethics is more of the rule set of the job that you have to abide by. So, you know, when you're doing a job, you might not necessarily agree with the work that you're doing, but you still have your code of ethics that you need to adhere to. So it's not to say that when you're, you know, representing someone who has either told you or you may perceive as guilty, but it's still your responsibility to put your best foot forward and do the best job you can.
I'll say this, though. I will say this, not to contradict you, of course, but the defense attorneys that I have been privileged to know, and know some of them well, are proud of their work. They're proud of what they do. They serve a constitutional function. They do what that separates the United States from other countries where people can just be grabbed off the street and thrown in jail. This country requires a fair trial. And I'm not saying it applies to this case or any of the specific case, but there are cases where there are abuses of that. There are cases where the police do overreach, and just the fact that people are afforded the right to an attorney in a fair trial keeps law enforcement, and I'm not disparaging law enforcement, I'm just stating that the fact that there are professional defense attorneys who are in fact proud of their work does keep law enforcement on its toes, and being certain that they do what they do with professionalism and within the confines of the Fourth and the Sixth Amendment. So, having said all that, do you have any final thoughts?
You know, if somebody threatens to kill you in a relationship, I know you might care about them, but they might be dangerous. If they commit, you know, tens of thousands of dollars in fraud, you know, might be dangerous, might have a little track record. I know a lot of people can empathize being in relationships with people who aren't that great. And even though they may do some awful things, you want to believe they're good. This is another story where, you know, it's when you see pictures of them, yeah, they look happy, but you really need to go with your gut instinct. If someone's not treating you well, you know, there's another true crimer that I like to watch who will remain unnamed, but she will tell stories like this one, and it's sad that there's so many of them, that there are people that work pretty much apparently full time on YouTube talking about these stories. But what she'll do is she goes through is she'll say, that's a red flag, that's a red flag, that's a red flag. And you know, the 2014 incident when Mr. Walshe threatened to kill Ana and then she overlooked it, red flag. The fraudulent sale of the Warhol paintings, that goes to character, red flag. The dishonesty towards his father, where he doesn't even get along with his own father, who is apparently a respectable, well-known, you know, neurosurgeon at one of the major hospitals, red flag. And those are only the three that we know about. So I agree with you totally, Lainey, that, you know, if you see red flags in a relationship, you know, it might be time to, you know, pack your bags. I don't know. And also, like, the one thing that I can think of too as well, you know, for Anna's mindset, I don't know, you know, too much about where she's from, but I know in certain other countries where there's a lot more crime and a lot more gang violence, unfortunately, and mobs and things like that. I've had, you know, no longer friends with this person, but I had one friend who comes from a country that will remain unnamed, but she one time was crying about her ex, and she was like, you know, my dad was right when he said that people disappear on vacation all the time. Like, I would have been out of this situation. So depending on where you're from, it might be a little bit easier to hire the right people. I mean, I'm obviously very far removed from that, but I just know in certain other countries, when certain threats of violence happen, you might be a little bit desensitized to that, which is unfortunate, but it could be some people's reality. And like I said, I don't know anything about her upbringing and I don't know anything about her country, but different lifestyles lead people to believe that other things are going to be more acceptable or not.
Okay, this is a case that will be playing out in the courts. And the other thing I was going to say, there may be motions to exclude evidence. It's a lot of times it's actually legal malpractice to not at least try to bring motions in limine, motions to exclude evidence. So that's, that kind of winnows down the evidence. And so all of that will be coming up. But at the time that we're recording this, all of that is to be seen in the news. And so thank you very much for watching. We hope we will have you like and subscribe to this material. Anything else, Lainey?
We will see you guys in the next one. Hit that subscribe button and we'll see you there. Bye.
Have a good one. Thank you.
You have been watching About the Law, a production of the law offices of Andrew D. Myers in Methuen in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts and in Derry, just outside of Manchester, New Hampshire. Remember to click the like and subscribe buttons down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to share it with your friends and others. If you'd like to talk to me about an injury case, a car accident, a slip and fall, a serious bodily injury case, or some other case, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to talk to you. You can contact us through my website at attorney-myers.com. We have a contact us block, or you can call on one of the telephone numbers we've given there, or you can email me at andrew@attorney-myers.com. The foregoing is offered for informational purposes only. It is not intended as and does not constitute legal advice. Laws vary widely from state to state. You should rely only on the advice given to you during a personal consultation by a local attorney thoroughly familiar with state laws and the area of practice in which your concern lies. This podcast must be and hereby is labeled advertisement in some jurisdictions.